Hi everyone, and welcome back out to Harvest Hill's Ranch. Have you been looking for chicken that is soy free, or maybe you're looking for chicken eggs where the chickens haven't been fed soy as part of their diet? If that's you, you've probably been misled on a few things, and I want to share some information with you to hopefully give you a different perspective. Now, some of you are thinking at this point, I don't want to listen to this guy. This guy's a soy advocate, and nothing could actually be farther from the truth. I'm not a soy advocate by any means, but I do think that there's some information, some valid science information out there that maybe we should take a look at and have a different perspective on. So with that being said, guys, I am Dr. Arland Hill out here at Harvest Hill's Ranch. I have a passion for all things nutrition, health, and wellness related, and I enjoy sharing this information with you and sharing about the things that we do out here at the ranch. One of the most common questions that I get is, do you feed your chicken soy? And we get this question when it comes to the laying birds, the egg laying birds. We get this question when it comes to our broilers, which are the meat birds. And so I thought it was probably time that I shot a video for you guys to help answer this and help you understand the thought process behind why I do have soy in our feed, and specifically what kind of soy. Now, let me also say, and just set the stage for our conversation right now, is that you cannot put all soy in the same category. And if by doing that, or if you do that, you are going to make some inaccurate decisions in regard to soy. But that I will speak more to as we go through this. So let me tackle some of these topics that often come up. So a recent one that I got was, I have a soy allergy. In fact, the statement was, my entire family has a soy allergy, and I can't eat chicken or eggs from chickens that are fed soy because we'll have a soy allergy reaction. Does that actually add up? And the short answer to this is no. And this doesn't matter if we're talking about a broiler bird, a meat bird. It doesn't matter if we're talking about an egg-laying bird. And there's a couple of reasons on this. So one, when the research has been done on this, what was shown is that the proteins that make up that soy, the quote-unquote soy allergens, none of those proteins are residual in the meat of the animal, and they're not residual in the protein of the egg either. And it's interesting because this is not just something that we see with regards to soy. This also holds true with other foods as well. So for example, in this one particular study, they looked at peanuts, and they didn't find the peanut proteins in there, which would be the allergen, the initiator of the allergenic response. Those weren't isolated in there either. So there's no reason to suspect that based on this information, that there would be a soy reaction when someone consumes the egg or the meat. But here's the other thing you have to consider with this, and that is that when you think about the intestinal tract of these animals, those animals have to take those proteins that they're consuming, and they have to break them down to a small enough size that they are actually assimilating those proteins and restructuring them for functional proteins in the body or for structural proteins in the body. If those animals don't break those down to a small enough size, then they're not actually utilizing that food source, and they're not going to thrive. They're going to die, essentially, right? So they have to be able to assimilate those. Point being on this, if that compound, if that protein stays too large, that is when the immune system starts to initiate a response against that. It's too small, guys. It is broken down. There is no possibility for it to initiate an immune response. Now, this is different, just to not confuse things here. This is different than if a human consumes soy protein. There is a potential for an allergen there. So that may seem like a bit of an obvious statement, but I do need to draw that differentiation. To our point is that when that animal is fed soy protein, they are not getting soy allergens. That protein has been broken down to a small enough size and restructured into the meat or to the bone or organs, whatever structural protein it is for that animal, or some of the functional proteins, which we could think about as the immune proteins or the blood proteins. So you have to set the stage and say, okay, those are different. I don't have any firm evidence, and based on the physiology of the bird, it doesn't make sense that if that bird's eating soy, I'm going to have a soy allergy reaction. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing we need to tackle here is looking at what are known as the phytoestrogens, or the isoflavones as they're more specifically termed, and whether or not these are a problem. Now, the isoflavones that we're speaking to, the two most common ones that are talked about here are genistein and diadenosine. Those are by far, there's other isoflavones that are present in soy, but those are the ones that are most specifically looked at. Now, let me draw this line of flow through the food chain out for you here, and this is that when you look at those isoflavones, those are what are categorized as secondary metabolites in the plant. Secondary metabolites can transfer from the plant to the animal to the human, so there is the possibility that we consume those. Which now changes the question. It's not whether or not we're being exposed, it's whether or not that exposure is actually causing a problem or not. And I think to best answer this, we need to differentiate between females and males. The typical concern when we start talking about females is that those phytoestrogens are going to increase cancer risk. They're going to increase breast cancer risk. And here we also have to fall back on some evidence and look at this and say that, one, there's been a lot of conversation out there about soy and these phytoestrogens that when you dig into the literature just doesn't hold water and it's not accurate. And so you look at these phytoestrogens and some of these don't show estrogenic activity. And when you look at these in interventional studies and when you look at these in epidemiological, big population-oriented studies, what is shown is that soy and these isoflavones specifically in soy do not correlate to an increase in cancer risk. And so when you talk about something like breast cancer, and even in situations where we're talking someone's had breast cancer and they're in remission, should they consume soy? The data on this even shows that consumption of soy is safe for those individuals as well. And let me rephrase that. It shows that the consumption of those isoflavones is safe. And again, I've got to differentiate as we go forward here the different types of soy. So stick with me on that. I'm going to do that momentarily. All right. That addresses the females. What about males? The concern here with males we often hear is that if we consume soy, it's going to, and specifically again, these isoflavones, if we consume these isoflavones, that is going to correlate to the feminization of men. It's going to drop their testosterone levels. Well, does that hold true? And in fact, when you look at a study like this one I'm showing you here, what you'll see is that in this study where they looked at multiple studies, they did not show that the participants had any change in total testosterone, in free testosterone, in sex hormone binding globulin, in estradiol or estrone, these different estrogens, that they didn't show any change in any of those from individuals, from males consuming these soy isoflavones. And actually in this study, they looked at soy and the soy isoflavones. So point being on this is that a lot of this stuff that we hear about the exposure to those in the diet and that's going to cause some detrimental health effects to us, that's not the case. And even one more thing I'll share with you on this is that in the male population, when you look at the increase of prostate cancer, there's no association with soy isoflavones and an increase in prostate cancer risk either. So we need to look at what the evidence is on this and not just buy into the notion that these are phytoestrogens, so they must act like estrogens, and by doing so, they're going to overstimulate tissue. Part of the problem with that logic right there, apart from anything that I've shared with you on these studies, is the assumption that every estrogen and estrogen-like compound is acting on the same estrogen receptor. There's estrogen receptors alpha, there's estrogen receptor beta, and the stimulation of one of those receptors versus another is going to have a different response. You stimulate these estrogen receptor alphas and you're going to have more of a proliferative response. Whereas if you stimulate the beta, it's more of a protective type of mechanism. It's more of a protective response. So again, point being here is that you can't lump all these things together. And when we talk about these isoflavones that can carry through the food chain from the feed that the poultry are given to the human consumption of those isoflavones in that poultry product, whether it be the meat or the eggs, there is no risk associated with this. Now, this brings up a third point in this conversation around soy. And one of the things that I was interested in, or still am interested in, and one of the things that I was very diligent about when we formulated our feed for our poultry, and this goes across all classes of poultry, whether we're talking about the meat birds, the egg-laying birds, chickens, ducks, guineas, across the board, this thought process has pervaded, and it is what I've worked on for a long time to really hone these down, are the fatty acid ratios. I want to make sure that the fatty acids in these products are not such that we're increasing the risk of driving an inflammatory state when we as humans consume those fats. We want to make sure that we're keeping a fatty acid ratio that's ideal. And this is a conversation that goes well beyond just talking about omega-3s and omega-6s. This is a conversation that starts to get us into things like saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. And so here's where we start to see a point of differentiation in the type of beans and the type of soybeans. When you look at typical soybeans, many soybean varieties out there are higher in polyunsaturated fats. They're going to have a higher concentration of linoleic acid. Now, granted, they're not 100% linoleic acid. None of these plants that we're looking at or talking about, none of these plants are 100% one type of fat that's in that plant. There are a diversity of fats in there, but there's also soybeans that are known as high oleic soybeans. And these soybeans on average run somewhere around 70 to 75. They can even get up to 85% oleic acid. Oleic acid is a monounsaturated fat. Oleic acid is very predominantly found in our cell membranes. And so when you look at that monounsaturated fat, that oleic acid, it is a much more stable fat. So that when we as humans consume that, it is promoting the stability of our cells and our cell membranes because of that lack of multiple saturation points that we find in these polyunsaturated fats. So let me back up just a second and add some clarity here. This part of our conversation really only boils down to one thing. Are we choosing soybeans that are high in polyunsaturated fats, or are we choosing high oleic soybeans that are high in monounsaturated fats and promote cellular stability? We are choosing soybeans that are high oleic acid soybeans. We want those. And those are non-GMO soybeans, which brings me to my fourth point here, is that there has to be, and this may be the one you're more familiar with, but hear me out on this. You have to source non-GMO soybeans, and the logic on this is that if they are a genetically modified soybean, they're going to be sprayed with herbicides, glyphosate being the most prolific on this, but by no means the only one that's being used out there. And as a part of that, you're going to have that residue in the food, and again, that carries up the food chain. So yes, there is a possibility if those birds are being fed genetically modified soybeans and the herbicide residue is on there, yes, you do have the potential for exposure to that. However, when you look at a non-genetically modified soybean like we use, those aren't being sprayed with the herbicides and the pesticides, so there's not going to be that residue there that would potentially filter up the food chain and that you would inherently consume. There's another part to this as it relates to that GMO, non-GMO conversation, which is to say that how do you know you're actually getting a non-GMO? And better yet, how do I, as a farmer rancher, how do I know that? I'm a producer of these products. How do I know that that is what is in the feed that I'm getting? And it boils down to one simple thing, and that is transparency. I only work with a single farm, a small farm, that everything is contained within that farm. All the products that we use in our feed, all the ingredients that we use in our feed as far as grains are coming from a single farm, where if I need information, if I need to understand about the practices on that farm, and I have done this on multiple occasions and continue to do this, I can pick up the phone and have a conversation. I can send an email, get an answer to something I need, and I have a representative that I can work with to continue to keep this conversation going, to provide me a constant flow of data to make decisions with. That all goes into the poultry feed, right? So it's not just going and grabbing any non-GMO soybean. I need a trail of transparency that I can work with, and I want to know where that non-GMO soybean is coming from, that it's a high oleic soybean, and that I can see everything in the process. So let's step back for a minute and reevaluate this as we come to a conclusion here. And that is to say that when we talk about soy and creating soy allergens, soy being fed to poultry and creating soy allergens, the evidence is to the contrary. The study doesn't validate that. The physiology of the bird doesn't validate that. When we look at these isoflavones and we hear about the health risk associated with these isoflavones, again, the body of literature that's out there doesn't substantiate that. So we have to put that aside. We have to be adamant about what type of soybeans are being used. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, how do I know all of this? How am I going to ever figure this stuff out? You need to do two things. One, if you're not purchasing from a local farmer, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to find a local farmer, because trying to get these questions answered and trying to find out some of these specifics from a larger commercial entity, all I'm going to tell you is good luck. You're not going to have it happen, and you're probably not going to get past step one in trying to do that. And I'm telling you that from experience, where we've tried to get these answers just as a basis for comparison. The other thing I would say is that once you isolate and find your local farmer, ask them about all these things we've talked about. Show them this video, walk through it with them, and help you understand why these types of soybeans, if they are going to use them, why they're important. And here's the other thing I would ask. If someone chooses not to use a soybean, again, I'm not a soybean advocate. I'm not a part of any soybean association and never intend to be. I'm not a big association person, period. But I would say, ask them why they choose not to include soybeans in there. And based on some of the information I've shared with you, the point is that they need to give you a rational answer of why that ingredient is in their feed, and not just because somebody told them to, or because they thought it was good to leave it out. Guys, I feel like as a producer, I have a higher responsibility to the people that patronize or patron our farm, and to the people that we serve with our food products. They have a higher level of expectation than me, than just simply saying to them, well, somebody told me it was a good idea. You should expect the same thing. So hopefully you have a different perspective on soybeans. And again, just let's bring the facts to the conversation. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Let's take the emotion out of the conversation and let's deal in logic and fact. And I think we'll have a different perspective, at least in this conversation. So with that being said, guys, hey, thanks for sticking around. If you're looking for more information about what we do out at Harvest Hills Ranch and some of the thought process that goes into other facets of our operation here, go to harvesthillsranch.com. You can find out all that information there. And if you're looking for what I do on the clinic side, you can go to drarlandhill.com and you'll be able to find out how I support patients. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.